As you see the 5-minute clock in the lower right-hand corner. Well, this is interesting, Al. First, Randy Newman said, we'll go to the cards. Then he says it's a TKO.
He loses 2 points, but he wins the TKO.
So now more of a delay as Miranda looks on.
High drama here. And now another doctor comes in to not only examine, but administer to after Abraham.
All right, we're going to fight. You want to fight?
It sounded like he said no to that question.
Did he understand Randy Newman?
You got a mouthpiece? Okay. You ready to fight?
Now, he asks him a second time. Abraham kind of reluctantly says okay.
Now, you ready to fight?
Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier!
Got it back! This should be the round of the century.
Look at Holyfield! What a warrior!
If he weighs 205, his heart weighs about 204.
It happened! It happened! I can't believe it.
That was astonishing, and he hurts him with a hook. Morales comes back a straight right. Now Castillo against the ropes. Unbelievable. Evans low. Morales waiting. Castillo's in trouble. Weak steps in, and the fight is over. Morales with a remarkable dramatic turnaround to win this fight.
If he gets up, he probably wins the fight. I can't believe it!
Unbelievable! Mr. Steele stopped the fight with fewer than 5 seconds to go. You're going to watch Lou Duba go crazy now. You're going to watch Lou Duba go absolutely berserk.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Punches from the Past, where we delve into the historical archives and talk about the fights that really mattered. My name is Steve Wellings and I'm joined in conversation with Andy Patterson, Kurt Ward and David Lee. Don't forget to check out our previous episodes. We've got some great fights like Sanchez versus Nelson, Ryan Rhodes, Jamie Moore, Thompson Sellers and Arthur versus Gomez. They're already in the books, but you can find those on iTunes, through Tumblr for download and over on the Facebook page as a direct listen. This week we find ourselves at the Rittal Arena, Germany, and Arthur Abraham's IBF middleweight title defence against Colombian livewire Edison Miranda from the 23rd of September 2006. Abraham had built himself up on the German undercards, defeating a slightly sliding Howard Eastman and a string of other reasonable opponents before picking up the vacant IBF crown against the spidery African Kingsley Aikiki, before outlasting perennial contenders Shannon Taylor and Kofi Jantua. But it was Miranda who was to provide his most demanding fight to date on every level. Kurt, it's a bit of an understatement to say that Miranda was the toughest test of Abraham's career, but just looking at it, what do we know exactly about the Colombian based in Puerto Rico, I believe he was, and Abraham, the two guys leading up into this fight?
Yeah, well, Abraham, obviously went on to become, a big draw in Germany, but here he is, picking up a title, and he's still, trying to get that status that like some of the other German fighters or guys who went on to base themselves in Germany went on to achieve. That'd be like the Klitschko brothers, Michael Huck, and Edison Miranda. Like you said, I think he beat Howard Eastman himself as well. That was really the only big-ish or name you might know on his record up to that point. But he's a big middleweight and he's a knockout puncher. I mean, he's very easy to hit himself, but these two would make a good stars clash, because Abraham, we know he's a puncher. Both of them are unbeaten. Both of them with, mostly knockouts on their records. And for each other, this is the toughest fight of their career at that point. And you got Abraham with his shell, defense, where he just covers up and doesn't do much, but then he unloads with, weird punches. Isn't exactly sweet science at its best, but it's worked well for him, especially at middleweight. And Miranda, yeah, you know, a big guy. You know, he's actually a pretty decent boxer. He doesn't get a lot of credit for, but you know, compared to Abraham, he looks a lot better. He's faster with his hands as well, and very tough place, especially then to go to Germany and try and rip her title away. And this fight is, you know, we know there's been some big controversial fights in boxing history, but, you know, this might not be on the scale of a Chavez Maldrick Taylor, you know, which we all know is infamous, but this has got to be one of the most controversial fights of that modern era because of, you know, what went down and you know, Edison Miranda being the foreign fighter being deducted 5 points and, you know, the scorecards, the referee and the doctor that we'll all come into, but, you know, a really good fight. And Abraham with one of the toughest showings you can possibly see, and you know, whatever you think of him as a boxer, and I think from that point on, everyone, especially German fight fans, had nothing but respect for Abraham, no matter what he went on to achieve, and he got a lot of love from this because the guy's shown that, you know, he was willing to fight and, you know, and put it all on the line. And you know, I found his team in his fight were a disgrace, to be honest, that willing to sacrifice basically his career, it could have been in the end, but you know, thankfully he went to fight on and had a long career, but just a really good fight. And you know, and Miranda himself, you know, he took some big shots in his fight and both big bangers, and you know, it's surprising it went 12 rounds, to be honest, with the amount of punches that were landed, but yeah, a really good fight and such a controversial 12 rounds.
Speaking of controversy, it was interesting how Abraham became IBF champion in the first place, wasn't it? I mean, the IBF,
Taylor, yeah.
Yeah, the IBF stripped Jermaine Taylor for having the nerve to fight Bernard Hopkins again. You know, he was only a Hall of Famer who'd been a champion for over a decade and had 20 middleweight title defenses. But yeah, why did Hopkins warrant a title shot? But you know, it was interesting as well because the rankings at the time, you know, Sam Solomon was actually the #1 contender with the IBF, and like Kiki was #2, I believe. Winky Wright was actually #3, and the aforementioned Abraham was #4. But because Solomon and Wright actually signed to fight each other at the same month that Kiki and Abraham fought for the IBF title, they were actually left out in the cold. You know, it's just crazy how these sanctioning bodies work. They seem to be along onto themselves.
And it's funny because that's exactly how it worked out with the IBF with Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. You know, they stripped Tyson Fury because he had the nerve to want to rematch Vladimir Klitschko, exactly the same kind of thing. And obviously they stripped him and put the title on another guy. And yeah, I mean, the Sauerlands, you know, very, very good promoters. They didn't miss a beat. They got that title, and you know, they weren't. You know, once they got that title to Germany, it was always going to be hard for a guy to get it back, to be honest.
Absolutely, because I mean, you mentioned, you know, Howard Eastman being defeated by Abraham. I mean, I remember at the time Eastman protested bitterly about that decision, didn't he? I mean, it was a close fight, but you know, as was often the case with Eastman, he just wasn't busy enough, was he?
Eastman protested every decision, didn't he, Dave?
He protested. He even protested the stoppage to Miranda, didn't he? He wasn't, you know, he wasn't throwing the punches back, and I think the referee was well within his rights to stop that one. But again, Eastman protested. You know, not to veer too off topic, but yeah, that was just Eastman, wasn't he? You know, all the talent in the world, but just wouldn't let his hands go.
And the thing is, with guys like Marco Huck and Arthur Abraham, you know, both trained by Uli Wegner, both have a very similar style. You know, don't do much, and they unload, and you know, they big punchers, big units in the ring. You know, it's very hard. You know, whenever there's a close-ish fight or the decision goes for them, people always class it as a robbery because it's in Germany. But to be a judge, I wouldn't like to be judging a lot of Huck and Abraham fights that go distance, because there is so many rounds where he might not do much for 2 minutes, but then he lands about 3 or 4 big shots that, you know, are the eye-catching shots of the round. And it's a tough one because, you know, especially in this fight, I think Miranda was rounds where he was just busier and just did more of the work. But Abraham's punches, like his right hand and his left hook, were eye-catching, and obviously the crowd get excited. And it's difficult to judge these kind of fighters, I think.
Andy, just looking at Miranda there, he was coming over as, I wouldn't exactly say an unknown quantity, but we didn't know a hell of a lot about him. I mean, this is a guy, you know, not an atypical sort of background. He was abandoned by his mother, I think, when he was about a month old, and just raised on the harsh streets of Colombia, did a bit of cattle farming earlier on, and then he found his home in the ring as an amateur, realised he could punch, but then he had a few fights early on in and around Colombia, Panama, Dominican Republic, all over the place. But someone brought him over to Florida, and it was his fight with Jose Varela, and they liked what they saw after he beat Varela. Then he knocked out Sherwin Davis, and people started to take a bit of notice over in America. I think it was only the small hall guys and the ESPNs at that time, but whenever he knocked out Howard Eastman, people were taking notice by that point. The IBF had got him highly ranked, and when he came over to Germany, he showed he wasn't afraid throughout his career to go and fight the big guys in the backyards, and he was a never-say-die fighter, really, Andy, big punching guy, and he came over and gave his all in this one.
Live by the sword, die by the sword, actually.
Yeah.
I think he actually is am I right in saying that Miranda's now serving time now for drug dealing and stuff?
In 2015, I believe he was on the run and they arrested him. He handed himself in or something, and I believe he's incarcerated at the moment, sadly.
No.
He didn't get the drugs in Liverpool after the value fight, did he?
Yeah, just we talk about Howard Eastman, mate. I mean, I think I'm not entirely sure on Eastman's current record just now, but I think he's only been stopped maybe 2 or 3 times actually. So I think that's testament to his durability and stuff. I give it the distance with Hopkins, as you says. Getting stopped in 7 rounds by Miranda is obviously kind of a bit eye catching. Going into the fight as well, 2 guys undefeated, big punchers and stuff. At the same time, I think first round, Miranda's putting the pressure on him, and I did think that Abraham was kind of loading up a little bit as well. The second round, as we're talking about the officiating, I just think the officiating the whole round in this fight was absolutely disgusting. From as Kurt mentioned there about, remember just before the start of the show was, the Serlins, did they really care about Abraham in this fight? I mean, what? Okay, you see a fighter hurt and you expect a fighter to kind of keep fighting sometimes, but there's a time when it's really grotesque and it needs to stop. The referee, the judges, maybe even, definitely the judges actually, the people at ringside, the doctor maybe at ringside along with the commissioners and stuff. If you look at it in round 2, I think Miranda landed he threw a right hand to the pit of the stomach, but I think Abraham had blocked it with the elbows, and obviously the punches then, deflected, and it's kind of like went down the downward motion towards the kind of like the groin area. I actually think hit around about the belt line, and Abraham's protesting, and the referee's basically on his case. And then in the same round, actually, when the bell goes, Miranda just not giving a toss about anything, just decides to throw another right hand at Abraham after the bell. Abraham then retaliates, so you kind of then, you get a much busier third round. I thought Abraham, still usually fighting in spurts, but round 4, obviously this is where we're going to get on to the main talking point of this fight. Actually, well, one of the main talking points of this fight was the right uppercut in round 4. That's probably was the punch I think that broke Abraham's jaw, because if you saw him coming out for round 5, he was breathing. It looked like he was breathing heavily, but it was just the way his jaw was contorted, and then the blood started to come. You had the commentary team in Showtime mention the blood. He's breathing heavily by the looks at it, and then by round 6, you just knew, shit was just basically going down. It was so bad. I think it was at round 5. It did look like Abraham, as I said, was breathing heavy. Miranda stalking him, and I think it was a clinch, a potential headbutt. To be honest, if you look at the headbutt, I don't think there's really much in it. It looked like kind of more like bashing the side of the head. It did look like at that point that they may try and get the fight called off at that point. But then I think if I heard who was the referee again? What's his name?
Randy
Newman. Absolutely horrible. I think he'd even mentioned to the commissioner at ringside that the broken jaw was caused by a punch earlier in the fight. Therefore, it would be classed as a TKO victory for Miranda. And I think obviously Serlins is obviously knew about this. I think maybe the corner maybe wanted to stop the fight, but I think the Serlins were saying, "Listen, you got to keep it going.
You got to get back out there."
Yeah.
I think go on.
Sorry, Kurt. Yeah, there was a lot of confusion in that 5-minute spell, Andy, wasn't there?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as you said yourself, they weren't sure whether if it was going to go to the scorecards, it was going to be classed as TKO. And when Randy Newman made it clear that no, the broken jaw or the cut lip, whatever you want to call it, at that point was caused by a punch, there and then, the doctor shouldn't have been treating it, should he? I mean, the doctor was treating the cut, stopping the blood flow, but he was in no position to do that. He had no right to do that because it wasn't caused by a foul. So there was a lot of chicanery going on in that 5-minute spell, I thought.
Yeah, sorry, Kurt, just bringing on this point, and for that incident, for the intentional headbutt, so to speak, the referee, even after discussions at ringside, even then went and took 2 points off Miranda during that same time frame. For what exactly?
I think I think this was a problem with having a referee who doesn't speak the language of the fighter. I mean, Arthur Abraham, I don't believe knew what Randy Newman was saying at all. You know, the Salons, we know the Callie speaks, you know, fine English, but you know, I don't think they was getting across. And I think what the problem was, Abraham obviously had this horrific injury. His mouth was wide open. There's one point, I think the fifth round, where the camera goes in when he's having his mouthpiece pulled out.
Oh man, you can hear Abraham shriek in pain as they were removing the mouthpiece.
The headbutt that Miranda did was stupid because he knew that Abraham was obviously suffered an injury, and to do that headbutt then, he just showed a lack of experience. Or you know, Miranda was obviously a weird character as well. He did some crazy stuff during his career, but to do that headbutt then, it gave Abraham a chance to stop the fight and have a break, which he was going to look to do at every opportunity. But then once Salon's team saw the headbutt, they believed they could stop the fight and they could go to the cards, where they believed, and rightly so, that their man would get the win.
Was there a point, mate? Was there a point during that 5-minute break where the referee asked the commissioner, "Do you want to go to the cards?" And then he says, "I think it was a punch that caused it." Then I think they maybe even thought that, okay, Miranda's ahead in the cards here. If they do go to the cards, he's going to win the fight.
Well, I'm not sure, but I think Randy Newman really should have been investigated for this, because he pulled the doctor up, and the doctor as well himself should have been up for investigation, because the doctor said he can't fight, and Randy Newman is on camera saying he can't fight. It needs to be stopped, and it's only when then they say what's going to happen, and obviously they say, well, no, it's not the headbutt, it's the mouth injury. He's going to be stopped in the TKO. Then they suddenly change their minds. The ref shouldn't have given him a chance. As soon as the doctor says he can't fight, and the ref says he can't fight, the referee should have called the fight off. But then he gave Salons the chance. Oh, well, it's going to be a TKO. Oh, well, hang on, then let's have a think about this. And obviously in German they're probably telling off, oh, well, rest up for another couple of minutes. Give us a chance to think. Oh no, you're going to be stopped. You know, we can't get to the cards on the headbutt, so you're going to have to fight on. And Arthur, you know, there's a footage of Randy Newman asking Arthur, "You okay to fight?" And Arthur seems to say no. But I don't know whether that's because he doesn't want to fight, or because he's trying to leave the illusion that he can't fight because of the headbutt. But he says no. And then a minute later he's asked again, and he kind of shrugs and says, well, I'm being told to. And he's kind of put into this now. Questions got to be asked. Once if he was seriously injured and he was out for a couple of years because of that injury, or he's never the same again. I mean, all these people, Salons, the doctor, and the referee need to have a look at themselves to give a fighter a chance to carry on after the doctor said he can't continue. He's just ridiculous.
Yeah, because it was pure survival mode in round 6. I mean, he backed off, circled the ring. Miranda hunted him all over that place, just looking to trap him against the ropes. But as I say, Abraham was just purely fighting for survival. I think during, well, I would probably say for the rest of the fight, actually. He might have shaded a few rounds here and there. Obviously, with the point deductions that then followed, especially in round 7, guys. I mean, I don't know. Again, Kurt, you mentioned the referee. I mean, he deducts a point off Miranda without a warning. He then lands a perfectly legal punch, then gets warned for it. And then I think he loses another point 2 seconds later for landing a left hook that was deemed to be low as well.
And what I can't stand is when a referee calls a low blow, not because he's seen it, but because the fighter, he's saying he got it.
Tells him, yeah.
Abraham is notorious. I mean, he's a crafty fighter. He's a stocky guy, he's a short guy, but he's got quite long arms, and that's why they develop that kind of peekaboo defense, because it's hard to penetrate the way he has it. And I don't believe Miranda was going low. Just that sometimes you have to force to try and go a bit lower to try and get in there because his arm's there. But I don't believe he was. You know, I think the headbutt was ridiculous, and you know that was right to be deduction. But I think the low blows are just ridiculous. And the low blow that happened, just trying to check when it was. I think it was round 8. I think it was. And that's when Abraham had another 3-minute break. And again, that's all because of the injury to the mouth. He's trying to have a little break and a rest.
Presumably dominating, which I think Edison Miranda for the most part is.
And Miranda now really has to be careful. He's getting close to being disqualified. Edison Miranda is a walking foul machine.
He will bend the rules. Yeah, there's no question about that. Now, in his case, he better stay away from the body.
The Arthur protested and said he hit him low, so then Randy Newman calls a stop and gives him a break. And after the 3-minute break, he then decides to another point deduction. It's like he's had 3 minutes and then he hooks him again. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that was the 11th round, Kurt. I mean, all throughout the fight, I thought Newman was just so indecisive, wasn't he? I mean,
he lost complete control.
He lost complete control. He had no authority in there. I mean, in the 11th round, as I was saying, he as you mentioned there, Abraham protested. He kind of motioned to the referee that he was hit low again. Newman didn't see it. You could tell. And, Newman, he was so indecisive. He was like, he called the break, and then he didn't look like he was going to call the low blow. Then he called the low blow. He left Abraham have like a 2-3 minute break, and then he came back and just said, why not? I'll just take another point. Just like there was no decisiveness at all from Newman at all.
Watching it, it's like one of those where you hear about the referee getting put up in a nice hotel, treated to a nice meal by the promoter. This is the Sauerlands. He just had the look that he just didn't. He wanted to try and be on the Sauerland side. It looked. I mean, I just think he lost complete control, but it looked like he was determined to stay on the good side of the Sauerlands and give Abraham as much chance as he could. I mean, if Abraham didn't have them points deducted, I'm not sure he would have continued, because there would have been little point, because he basically couldn't win the fight. But because of all these point deductions, they basically told him, if you can get through 12 rounds, you've won a few rounds at the start. If you can get to 12 rounds, you'll win the fight. And Miranda only had one chance, and that was a knockout. And he was a bit stupid in him even going to the body in the end, because his only chance was aiming at that injured mouth and trying to injure it more. But I just think for everything about Abraham, it's a testament to his balls, basically, because Miranda's a big puncher, and especially at that weight. And he was landing some nasty shots right on Abraham's chin, and he didn't budge, and he didn't really. He was still trying to hurt Miranda himself, and it's just. It was just a wild fight.
It was bravery that didn't need to happen, though, Kurt, wasn't it? I mean,
it was above and beyond the Call of Duty, mate.
It was just insane. I mean, your man Abraham just had a mouthful of blood. I mean, there's one point there where he's leaning over Miranda, and the blood just like pours out of Abraham's jaw and it just drips on Miranda's back. I mean, it's one of the most gruesome sights I've seen in boxing.
Was it not unnecessary, Dave, do you think, for the sake of an IBF middleweight title? I mean, what were they thinking? Was it not a bit unnecessary?
Well, they got the rematch. They got the rematch at the end of the day.
Exactly. I mean, yeah.
Title was on the line, or what bottle was on the line. I mean, first and foremost, what's paramount is fighter safety.
Exactly. It seemed too much, didn't it?
Look at Abraham's expression. I mean, they seem oblivious that Abraham's jaw is ajar.
And you can feel and hear the pain from Abraham. It's excruciating to watch. It's a rough period in this fight, that's for sure.
I mean, wouldn't some corners take this as a cue to protect their fighter? I mean, I understand how intense it is. There's a great deal at stake, the title, lots of money, but somewhere don't you have to draw the line?
It's clear that he is in great discomfort, and he fights on.
Absolutely, it's ridiculous.
It reminded me of Kostya with Denis Lebedev against Guillermo Jones. He's sending his man out. The man he's seriously injured, and he's in no fit state, but he's been sent out to fight. And a fighter, let's be honest, that they'll continue. If they're being told they're ahead or they're in the fight, they'll go ahead. But that fight should have been stopped. And I think the doctor as well. If that doctor, who was definitely in the Sauerlands, pocket, I think, because he should have been forcing his way out there, saying, I need to check on him every single round. He should have been brave and said, this guy can't continue. I'm sorry, but he can't. Yeah. But he was happy just sit on his seat, on his nice seat, and then watch the fight. He was just happy to stay away from it. Basically, let Randy Newman take all the flack. But even Randy Newman, where was he every round saying, look, this, come and have a look at him. I think at the end of the 10th round, actually the 10th round is actually a point where if you're watching it live, or you're watching it for the first time, you think there's a chance of Abraham being stopped, because he wasn't firing back at all. He was getting beaten around the ring a bit, not stopped as in, knocked out and laid on his back, but just beaten from a barrage of punches. And at the end of the round, you can hear Randy Newman saying, near the microphone, this guy's hurt. And I don't know who he's saying that to, but he's obviously saying it to someone in the sound area. And what does he do? There's no doctor investigate. No one cares. It's just, we'll get through these 2 rounds. Really, Wagner doing his usual, shouting, trying to get his man motivated to stay in it. But I think if I was Arthur Abraham, I'd look at that and think, do these guys give a damn about me at all?
I just know that is inexplicable to me. I mean, Randy Newman has had a rough outing here, and that
was not his best moment in this fight.
This guy's hurt.
You could hear Randy Newman say this guy is hurt, of course, referring to Abraham.
Well, actually, in the 10th round, Kurt, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was the 10th round anyway, Abraham actually turned his back, and Newman actually stopped the action and asked Abraham, is he okay? He had no right to do that at all.
Yeah, he was surviving, mate. That's all he was doing. He's just running. I mean, as I said, I think, apart from maybe round 7, which I think we were obviously discussing before we recorded this about the scoring at round 7, because obviously I think there was a couple of point deductions there, and I ended up giving it 9-8 or something, because the scorecards, we say, were all over the place. But round 9, I think, was the only round I actually gave to Arthur Abraham. From maybe round... I would probably need to say maybe even the 5th would probably be the last round that I actually gave that Abraham I actually felt won, apart from the other rounds where he got the point deductions and stuff. But because I did think it was just merely trying to buy time as Miranda was coming back up sometime as well. But he was covering up pretty well on the ropes, and he did take a left hook. But I did think he finished the round pretty strong. But for the remainder of that fight, even for large swathes of that fight, actually, he was just running pure survival mode. And as I says, the scorecards were absolutely horrendous. There was anybody listening to this, if you've not seen this fight, go watch it. I'm actually interested. I want you to tweet me what your scorecard is. I'm not going to troll you if you've got it fucking wide or whatever and stuff. I just want to know how you scored it, because some of the guys have scored it differently for me. It's a point each side or whatever. But it's just some of how the rounds were scored and stuff have got different rounds. So I think the guys you've got it, was it 112, 111 to Abraham?
Yeah, I mean,
I had it 112 a draw.
In rounds, I've got it 8 rounds to 4, Edison Miranda. I think, early there's a rounds that you can give Abraham. Abraham does, his usual. He takes his spots and he fights in spurts. I think I did pretty much even after about 6 rounds, but obviously after the 5th round, and he gets the injury, that's just when Miranda starts to take over more and more. And with a point deduction, Abraham just about wins on my card. But what is, to add to the list of disgraces about this fight is, even if Miranda didn't have a single point taken off, he still loses a majority decision on the card.
Majority decision, yeah.
How is that possible? I mean, I think I'll just get the scorecards up here. I mean, 116, 109, great referee Dave Harris had it. I mean, so that means he had a scorecard of 116, 114, that without the point deductions. Larry Hazard had 115, 109. I mean, and then the other judge would have had a draw, so he obviously, gave 6 rounds each. But I mean, how can, even without, it didn't even matter. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, if you watch the fight, Al Bernstein's basically, he seems to have given nearly every round to Miranda. Yeah, he thinks that Miranda, it still will be a close fight, even though he's had 5 points deducted and he probably won't win the fight because it's too big of a gap, but he still thinks it's a close fight, which is what I had it, 12-1, 12-11, but scorecards are just absolutely abysmal.
Yeah, the officials have to be called into question here. I think you made a good point earlier, Kurt, and it's a point that we've made many times on podcasts, that whenever the judges and that are getting paid, like you say, nice dinners, nice hotels, they're more inclined to side with the promoter. I think there was a vacuum of power and organisation going on here. Nobody really knew what to do. Randy Newman was never in control of the situation. So the Sauerland, jumped into that vacuum and they started to micromanage the situation. They basically told Newman what he should be doing after the 5th round or the 4th, whenever it was that the draw went, I think it was the 5th. And every time, like you said, the doctor was on, the Sauerlands were telling him exactly what needed to happen. They were micromanaging the situation and Newman was incapable of doing it himself, I think. But overall, it was a bad-tempered affair. The amount of low blows, little nudges, headbutts that were going in. Miranda was no saint himself, but he brought the devil out of Abraham for the first 6 rounds. And the second 6 rounds, as you guys said, Abraham was just boxing on the back foot. Does anybody have a case to make, maybe, to be sympathetic to the judges? Do you think Miranda did everything he could to try and get the fight ended or to win on the cards? Do you think he maybe lacked the ring IQ to capitalise on Abraham's injuries, or do you think he did everything he could and everything was just against him?
Yeah, I think he could have done more. I mean, I think whatever he done, unless he knocked Abraham out, I think he's losing that fight no matter what, because it was just, everything was against him. But he could have done more. I mean, to see Abraham in that state, not firing much. I mean, he only had to be a bit more, had a bit more guile about him, a bit more cleverness about him. He just seemed to be swinging away at him, and he was going to the body. I mean, I know it was in his right, but once he was deducted points for going to the body, he knew he should have stayed well away from it and just concentrated on the head, because that was where the injury was, and just keep forcing it. I mean, in the 10th round, like I said, I thought he really went for it, and I thought Abraham was on the verge of maybe the referee having to stop the fight because he was just giving it. I just think Miranda wasn't an experienced guy at the time either. I mean, he went on to fight, basically a who's who around that weight class and the other weight classes, but at the time he wasn't experienced. The headbutt was ridiculous, and it gave Abraham kind of a way out of the fight and a reason to continue the fight, because once he knew 3 deductions, 4 points, he knew that as long as I get there, in the end he didn't even matter. He still would have won on the cards anyway. It's a terrible fight all round, but luckily there was a rematch, but the rematch didn't really happen probably when it should have done. It happened a few years later, but Abraham did put everything to doubt. I mean, Miranda got everything he wanted, really. He got it in out of Germany, and Abraham really, put a full statement on it, to be fair to him.
I agree with you, Kurt. Basically, what you said about Miranda, not maybe having the guile or the nous to actually finish that fight. Because you says, as we know, he was rough and tumble. He was basically just going in there, maybe smothering his work too much. Abraham was obviously surviving, he's running and stuff. That being the case, just kind of set traps for him. Because, as you say, he was headhunting, no working the body as much. So, saying that, I can maybe understand as well why he's not working the body, because he's already lost a point earlier in the fight for a left hook. It's probably borderline, very borderline. He's then been warned for a right hand that deflected off the elbow as it went down low. So he's thinking to say, right, okay, if I hit any more low blows, I could maybe end up getting DQ'd here. I just think, if he just took his time, because you remember as well, he broke the jaw in the 4th round, but by the 6th, you could tell that Abraham was suffering badly. So you got another 6 rounds to kind of figure a plan out, just kind of set a trap for him, and just basically, take it away from him, just chip away at him, just make him quit if you could. But at the same time, I think it was around about round 10. I think even Al Bernstein maybe even mentioned, I think they were really questioning as well about that point, how much could Abraham take? Because, I'm repeating myself here, but, it was just pure and utter survival.
Can anybody remember who was in Miranda's corner? Was it Spanish-speaking? Was it Latinos?
The trainer was a Jose Bonilla, wasn't it?
Oh, was that him? That wasn't the Cuban guy, was it?
I'm not sure where he was from.
I'm just wondering, like I said at the beginning, I thought Miranda maybe lacked the ring IQ, and Andy, you said, the guile as well. I'm just wondering who was in his corner giving the instructions, just as a point of interest.
But I do remember your man Bonilla giving an interview with I think it was Kyo Boxing Magazine back in the day, and he had mentioned at the time that they were working on sharpening Miranda's skills, because they even admitted, as Kurt said himself, that Miranda was probably a bit naive in his attacks, and he lacked kind of the guile and the polish to effectively finish off a damaged man in Arthur Abraham, which he probably really should have done.
Yeah, this was his best chance to win a world title. He had it right there for him. He just couldn't get it done. But I think this gave weight to a lot of maybe more of the American fans, because obviously this was broadcast on Showtime, that Germany was the place where you had to knock out someone to get a draw, because you had the Sven Ottker incident, which I don't know how many of them they saw, with Robin Reed, where he was warned basically punching Sven Ottker in the face. You got and you got this where it looked like it was just impossible. You had to not literally put the guy out cold to get the win. And obviously now we see that Germany's not as bad as it is, but this was just a case that this was an American referee, and he was being dictated to by Sauerland. And I think it just showed that it didn't matter where it was. If you've got a promoter and a referee who's willing to bend the rules for them and let them get away with it, it will happen anywhere. And Randy Newman, he should have been in control of the fight, and he just didn't have a clue, and he really had a terrible night. And it just gave weight to Germany's a place of corruption.
This went above and beyond your basic everyday robbery, though, didn't it? I mean, this was basically risking a fighter's health and well-being. I mean, he must have been swallowing blood with the amount of blood that was in his mouth. And we all know the danger. I mean, I referenced Mayor last week, the first fight, and of course that fight was stopped because Corrales had 2 cuts in his mouth, and he was bleeding profusely from his lip. And the referee stopped the fight on the advice of Dr. Margaret Goodman, who was the ringside physician, and she mentioned in the post interview the dangers of a boxer swallowing their own blood. I mean, you had Abraham there with a mouthful of blood fighting for, what was it? I mean, 7-8 rounds. Crazy stuff.
Yeah.
It was Jose Bonilla, by the way, just to confirm, that was training him in Puerto Rico. Leon Margules from Warrior Boxing had brought him over, so it would have been Bonilla in the corner, yeah.
You just wonder how much authority Yuli Wegner actually had in the corner, because as I said on the main show a couple of weeks back, when I was mentioned Joey Gamache, he works with the Scandinavian fighters. He's actually contracted to Sörland. Okay, so he trains all the Scandinavian fighters and stuff, but as you say, like, Yuli Wegner was actually, he was the main trainer for the big German guys, Huck, Abraham and stuff. So you just wonder as well, did he actually have the right to stop that fight? Because he's contracted exclusively to Sörland. Would he lost his job if he made the decision to stop the fight? You just don't know.
Possibly. So Sörlands were in control, though, weren't they? They was telling everybody, the referee, the commission, the doctor, the corner, they were calling the shots. If they wanted the fight called off, it would have got called off. They were telling everybody what was happening here, and as far as they was concerned, that fight wasn't stopping. If Abraham's jaw was lying on the ring, that fight wasn't stopping.
You've got to remember as well, when we think of Sörland now, we think of Callie Sörland and his brother. They're a bit like Eddie Hearn. They've come from the father.
It was Wilfred, wasn't it, Kurt, back then?
At the time, it was Wilfred, who's more old school. He's, you got to remember, German boxing was in the doldrums for years. It's only the last decade they've really produced a lot of, mainly guys who've come from other countries to pick up the sport. And they've got TV audiences, the TV ratings have gone, sky high, and they've had fights, and they've really become a bit, well, they were a bit of a power in the boxing world, and it's starting to fade again now. But Wilfred is old school, like Barry Hearn, like Frank Warren. Sons, they've like Eddie Hearn now, they've come from him, and they've changed things a little bit. But he was the power there, and he's not stopping that fight. And I think Uli Wegner is the same type of guy. I mean, the guy is someone you wouldn't mess with, and I think what he says goes as well. And him and Wilfred, I think, have the power, and with Huck and with Abraham, that what they say goes. I mean, if you remember when Abraham lost to Carl Froch, when he gave an absolutely terrible performance, Uli Wegner publicly absolutely destroyed him and said, he was a disgrace. He needs to see a therapist because he's got problems. He's embarrassed to be in the corner for him. And Abraham, he's not exactly a soft man himself, but he kept quiet. He never said nothing. So I just think it shows that Uli Wegner is a guy who's a bit disciplinarian, who what he says goes.
Yeah, I agree with what you say there, mate. Because I remember as well when after the Drell fight, when he was low. If you go back and watch the Fight Camp 360 episodes and stuff, obviously you can hear the translation or the subtitles at the bottom and stuff. And when that actual punch landed, you see Abraham in the corner and there's shit kicking loose and stuff, and you hear Uli Wegner shouting to him, calm down, my son, calm down, my son. So obviously he kind of treated him like as a father figure, eh?
Mm. Kurt's right. Wilfred was building something at that time. German boxing had been going through a lull, and in the previous years, maybe 2 or 3 years, through Universum, Wilfred had really been building something up, and he wasn't going to let it go easily. Same with Klaus Peter Cole over on ZDF. I think he had Felix Sturm at the time, Zolt Erdei, Karol Baljai, a couple of those guys, and there was no way Wilfred was letting this get in the way of anything.
No, and the thing is, the title might seem of nothing really, but to them, that title meant big time boxing in Germany. The two biggest stars were the Klitschko brothers, and they didn't have control over them. And they needed a title to add something to them. And obviously, with Abraham, they had Marco Huck. They didn't have Felix Sturm either, another big, German name at that time. So they needed to get going. And Abraham and Huck went on to be, big stars, both, born outside of the country, but came to be big stars. And the Sörlands did a good job. And like I said, it's starting to fade for them again now. So they're going to have to try and, do something about it now. But that title, they put their man's career on the line for that title. So, for them, I don't know if it was worth it, but they'll say yes. But Abraham, I'm sure, must have surely thought, do these guys give a shit about me? But maybe he saw the paycheck at the end of it and he just didn't care.
Speaking of Sturm, it's a real shame that Arthur and Sturm never got it on in Germany. I mean, that would have been massive, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's true. I still, at some point over the last 18 months, I still expected that fight to get made, especially when I think it was really hinging on Sturm beating, who was that guy? Judenhoff, yeah. Because I think they were really looking at the unification fight, because I think Abraham still held the WBO title. Sturm got beat. failed the drugs test, and obviously Abraham's got a mandatory defence against Ramirez, and then now we've got a rematch coming up with Matt Murray.
I think it's lost its. I think it's lost its. It's lost its luster now.
Oh, it
hasn't
has. Yeah. It's worthless now. It's worthless.
Yeah, but both are past their prime, and they're they don't have titles, so. I mean, it might have some appeal in Germany, but in the worldwide landscape, as you said, Steve, it's fairly meaningless, and it's just a shame it didn't happen when both were in and around their prime back in the middleweight division.
After Sturm had beaten Castillo in the rematch, and then Abraham went on, beat Miranda in his rematch around that sort of time, it would have been perfect.
Around that time frame, yeah.
And it just shows, the Salons, that they're having to keep weeding out Abraham when he's well past his best. I mean, this fight was 10 years ago now. He's fighting at a super middleweight now. We saw him in Vegas, get absolutely schooled by Gilberto Ramirez. They're still wheeling him out to fight Martin Murray because, in today's boxing world, there's so many titles. They know that if beats Martin Murray, he's back in line for a title shot. And if they can get a weak champion or a vacant title shot back in Germany again, there's a good chance Arthur can be a champion again, and that keeps the career going yet again. So it's just they have to do that. They've lost Michael Huck now as well. So
I think he's actually even renewed his contract for another 2 years. He either expires in 2017 or 2018, I'm sure.
What age is he now? 36?
Abraham's 36, 37, I would say, and plus he's got an iron. It's literally he's actually got an iron jaw. Titanium jaw, actually. He's actually got a plate put in there. And funny enough, actually, just think about it as well, how grotesque that injury was. He was back in the ring fighting 9 months later.
Jeez.
Scott Quigsnell fought now, and he's been at the ring now for, what 6 months?
And
it'll be longer.
And the thing is, it's never reared its ugly head again, to be honest, in any fight, has it? I know he got injured against Robert Stieglitz in a fight, but that, it's never really come up again in any other fight, which is, considering his style and considering he gets hit, it's been surprising that he's had such a long career. And, for a guy, let's be honest, who isn't the most talented guy, he's just, made of iron, basically. He's had a really successful career, considering.
It's important to remember, though, just for kind of newer fans to the sport who are listening to the show, that, they look at Abraham today as a beatable fighter and, a guy who's had a lot of home cooking. But, back around this time period, he was looked upon as a fearsome middleweight, wasn't he?
Yeah, he definitely was, mate, because I think after this fight, after Miranda beat Sebastian Demers, it was okay, it was his first fight back after the situation. But then if you watch the Corin Gavor knockout in the 11th round, I mean, he folded him up like an accordion. I mean, that was like a kind of left hook, kind of left uppercut come cross type punch that he threw in the guy. And when I say it folded up like an accordion, I mean that his knees basically folded quick as anything, and the guy's basically on his knees, his body's all contorted, his head's to the side and stuff like that, knocked the fuck out.
It's like a movie knockout, Andy, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, mate.
Like something choreographed from a movie. I mean, if anyone hasn't seen it, it's definitely a highlight reel KO.
It's probably going to be his knockout. Well, if you ask him, it's probably going to be Jermaine Taylor knockout. But I would say that is probably the best knockout after Abraham's career.
I would say so, yeah.
It's the most spectacular looking, definitely.
The thing about Abraham is he was a big puncher, really, if you think about it, because you mentioned Corin Gavor. He was getting outboxed for long periods of that fight, I thought. Wayne Elcock was even outboxing him for a short period before he knocked him out. Elvin Ayala didn't really give him any trouble. I remember Taylor, he was behind probably against Taylor. I'm not sure how far. Maybe he caught up by that point. I can't exactly remember the fight, but then he knocked him out. But he was, like you say, he came out of the blocks against Miranda as well in the first fight. It's important to remember, he wasn't always this slow plodder. He was always a tight, high-up guard guy, but he used to throw a few more punches than he does now. And I wouldn't go so far as to say he was exciting, but he was a lot different. But as for Miranda, I have his record up in front of me, actually, guys. Miranda never got a win, really, at the highest level, did he? After this fight, if you look at his record, he beat the fringe guys, your Willie Gibbs, your Alan Greens, David Banks, those type of guys. But he ran into the fists of Kelly Pavlik, Andre Ward. That was Ward's breakout win, really, against Miranda. Lucien Butte was really on the slide by that point. And then after that, Chilemba, Bellew, he was finished by that point. Alvarez, and eventually Dortico. Miranda never had a signature win at world level. He never had that big win, if you look at his record.
I'll take issue with that, Steve. If you remember, he came to the York Hall to fight Joey Vegas on Eurosport.
As we
Point
said
well
last week,
made. Sorry, Andy. Point well made.
as we said a couple of weeks back, actually on the Pavlik Taylor one, actually it was actually Miranda was actually Kelly Pavlik's breakout victory before he actually won that fight against Jermaine Taylor. As for Abraham, I just think he was one of those fighters. We mentioned it about Bellew, for instance, kind of caught between two divisions. I think Abraham was slightly too small for super middleweight,
Yes,
but just
he was.
far too tight as he got older for middleweight.
Yeah.
Because if you mentioned it, he wasn't always a kind of slow plodder. Because if you look at his fights after after Darrell and Froch, for instance, when he was handily beaten, obviously he had the tune-up fight against Bozic, and then he fought Andre Ward. He basically plodded through some of those fights. Petr Wojciechowski, Robert Stieglitz, the first fight wasn't all too great. I did think as well, he fought, who was it? Isaac Ekpo. That was
Grenade.
the grenade. I watched that fight. That was AIDS, pure AIDS. Giovanni De Calise, Sidge Loca as well. I remember watching Sidge Loca as well because that was really gave us a kind of insight into the Callum Smith fight. Paul Smith twice. Took Paul Smith twice. 24 rounds with Paul Smith.
Do you think, Andy, that it'd be fair to say about Miranda, given the fact he lost to Abraham, the Pavlik fight, the Andre Ward fight, even Bellew to a certain extent at that point, do you think Miranda's career was defined by him being a good name on people's records?
He was a gatekeeper, mate. I just think, as you say, he never got over the top. He was always one of these guys. You knew he was tough enough to take someone on the cusp of world level rounds. Test the chin, test the stamina, test the heart, and all that sort of stuff. See where you're at. But as you say, once he likes, he beat Alan Green. I know Alan Green's not great shakes and stuff, but the knockout defeat to Pavlik was really kind of down with Sparrow. He got the chance to after Abraham rematch. You say Joey Vegas, Andre Ward after that. After then, it was like moving up in weight. I think he even ended his career at cruiserweight at one point. I think his last fight was against a guy who was 0-4.
Yes.
So that tells you where he was actually at. I mean, I just think if he had actually managed to go over the top, he might have actually stayed in shape, maybe stayed in the division a wee bit more. But I just think the kind of guy he was a big, heavy guy. Maybe had a wee bit too much muscle, but I think the last time I saw him fight would probably be the Elder Alvarez fight, actually. He may have been dropped in that fight, if I remember rightly. But at the same time, I just think if you look at that fight, you just knew that Miranda at that point was done damaged goods. And maybe around about that time as well, he actually had his eye on other things, as I mentioned at the start of the show there. Maybe he was actually involved in the cusp of his cocaine dealing as well.
Yeah, the thing is, we know Tony Bellew beat him. He's not saying he's the best Edison Miranda, but he still beat him. That's fair enough. But I think with someone like Abraham, I think he's an overachiever. The guy, he doesn't look like the most talented guy in the world. If you're a fighter, if you're a good fighter, you're Andre Ward's, you Carl Froch's, you should beat him really. But he's there. He can give you trouble. We know it. But at middleweight, as Andy said, he was a middleweight. Just like someone like Marvin Hagler was a middleweight, and if he moved up, it'd be the end of him. And at that weight, he was fearsome because he was a massive unit at the weight. He was a stocky guy, very powerful. Come forward and tough to beat. But a good fighter, a slick guy will beat him. But at middleweight, fights with like Sturm and Pavlik at that time, I think they're tough fights to call. And I know Pavlik, obviously beating like Jermaine Taylor would have been the favourite, and being an American and having more hype behind him. But Abraham would be tough for those guys, I think. But he has had a really successful career. He's made a lot of money for himself, considering the lack of talent, in my opinion. But because of his toughness, and Edison Miranda, I think he was a decent boxer, and I think he could have been better with more, better training and more ring IQ. He just didn't have it. But there's no shame in losing some of the guys he lost to, and he was a typical gatekeeper who, if you someone like a prospect or a guy, who he could catch them, if they weren't on the game, but if they're good enough, they'll beat him. And there's no shame in that. But yeah, both guys, Abraham definitely overachieved, and Miranda probably in the days of all these titles will probably look back and think maybe I should have got one of these titles, I should have done it, but he didn't. And I think this fight he had his perfect chance, and he just couldn't get it done, which was he was a nearly man, which showed in this fight.
With Abraham, I think the same weaknesses that were exposed up to super middleweight were still present at middleweight, but the difference was the strength he had in middleweight and the power that were the difference makers in middleweight. They didn't. He didn't take that up to super middleweight with him, did he? He just didn't make that leap. And as you said, he was a one division fighter. The power didn't carry up to middleweight. The strength, or the power didn't carry up to super middleweight rather. The strength didn't carry up with him. And they were his two biggest assets, and he didn't have them at super middleweight. He still had like the ring savvy, and the ring IQ, the polish, but those two big strengths he had just didn't carry up with him. With regards to Miranda, sorry Andy, I was just going to say, with regards to Miranda, you referenced the Alan Green fight there. I actually thought he looked very good against Alan Green, and he actually showed a bit more polish and some sharper skills than he showed in his earlier fights. But I do think the Pavlik defeat took a lot out of him.
Was the Green fight, Dave, whenever Green was just running for 10 rounds and Miranda even stopped in the middle of the ring at one point and started doing a wanker symbol at him?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I mean, if you take the Jermaine Taylor knockout, as you say, Dave, his power didn't carry up as such. I mean, Jermaine Taylor, you could probably say, was, as we discussed in one of the last episodes, Taylor mentally probably was shot at that point.
He's a middleweight himself as well.
Yeah. If you think about it, his best knockout probably only came at super middleweight about it would be last year actually against Robert Stieglitz. I mean, he hit him with a straight right hand, right square, right in the middle of the head that basically just threw off his equilibrium and put Stieglitz down and basically knocked him out. Really, that was probably his best victory. Super middleweight. If you take the Taylor knockout out of the equation there.
Yeah, if he had power, he would have knocked out Paul Smith. We saw Gale put him away. George Groves, knocked him out. But I think in terms of Abraham, I think the most impressive win in terms of when he actually showed he could box was the Stieglitz trilogy fight. When he went into Stieglitz's backyard, he was considered past it. He was considered shot, to be honest. And it was actually, it was in Germany, but it was actually in Stieglitz's backyard. And the Salins had to give in to Stieglitz to get that fight and gave him everything he wanted. And Abraham actually went in and actually boxed. And the first time he's probably ever boxed. Mm-hmm. And he boxed well and he got the win, which was, a really good win from him at the time. And he just showed that, he had learnt a few things along the way. And he wasn't just this guy who just stood there with his earmuffs on and just, windmilled away when he, with 30 seconds left of a round. It really showed. And, I still probably expect him to beat Martin Murray again. So, he's still going to go on, I think.
It's a good point, that, because, as you say, Kurt, he won that fight, but he did it, you say boxing, but he did it off the back foot, jabbed. Usually, if you see after Abraham go on the back foot and that, he's got the earmuffs up and he's just basically walking back, looking for a moment to basically strike to attack and that. Didn't do it this time, boxed pretty well. I think he even had Stieglitz take a knee in that fight because I think basically the counter punching was taking its toll.
In the last round,
yeah.
Any more final comments before we draw this final episode of the series to a close?
Yes, we've got new fights to come up. We don't know when we're going to be releasing them yet, but there's some irons in the fire. People even offering their cash to get the full series sent to them beforehand. Discussions will be had.
And also, fans to send in, any recommendations of fights that that we can look at and decide amongst ourselves if we can discuss them as well.
Absolutely, and as I think you mentioned earlier, Andy, definitely for people listening to this particular podcast, please send us in your scorecards because we'd like to hear how you scored it.
Definitely.
I'm sure with this type of fight, with all the point deductions and all the chicanery going on, you're going to get varying scorecards. So definitely, guys, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this fight.
It's definitely not Ricky Burns' relic scorecard anyway, but it's if you can keep a tally, doesn't matter. There's going to be, if you've never scored a fight properly or whatever, I'm not going to troll you about it. All I want to know is what your scorecard was. Score it how you felt it, how you feel it goes, because it's going to be really interesting.
But I think this is the type of fight that Twitter was made for. It would have been great if this fight was going on like this past week or so, because Twitter would be all over the place.
It would be meltdown.
There'd be uproar galore. But one thing I want to add as well, the Showtime commentary, when they called Edison Miranda a walking foul machine. I think that was a bit harsh, but it was funny.
I didn't actually hear the Showtime commentary. The only versions I've ever watched have been in German commentary, so I'll have to try and fish that one out at some point. But yeah, the guys have brought it right back up to date again. But this fight actually ends our first series of Punches from the Past, as I mentioned earlier. But the resounding feedback suggests that it's been pretty well received, and we're already making plans for Series 2 at the moment. So if you have any suggestions, comments, complaints, anything like that, drop us a line. And most importantly, spread the word, share the episodes, and also watch them on YouTube. Watch the fights on YouTube, guys, if you haven't seen them. I'm going to start hopefully fishing them out and putting them up on the Facebook page, the actual YouTube links, and then you can go along and watch them because they are all worth a watch. The fact that we've picked these 10 is because they're watchable, Andy, and people should go out and watch them because they're great fights.
1000%, if you can even say that nowadays. But as I say, every single fight we've covered over this first series is on YouTube. Get up off your arse. It's only 36 minutes. For 45 minutes you want to include the likes of the ring walks and in between rounds and stuff
or
like
less,
that.
Or less.
Or less. Some of these fights, that's Sellers and Alex Arthur and all those fights and stuff. Jermaine Taylor against Kelly Pavlik.
Rhodes and more,
Rhodes and more. So it's not going to be a full 12 rounds and stuff. Get up off your arse. Put the wife to bed, put the kids to bed, stick on the TV, put your USB port in, stream it from your laptop, from YouTube onto your TV, sit back with a beer and a nice wee toke of a joint and just relax, score it and let us know.
Instead of sitting there complaining through, your Bellew or your Flores undercards or your Frank Warren
shitty fights,
fucking undercards, you can stick these fights on. I made a tweet the other day that this is the best first series since The Sopranos. No one refutes that, so...
Mate, it's something about Breaking Bad. Something about Breaking Bad, definitely.
Yeah.
Certainly is, guys. And if you haven't left an iTunes review yet, then maybe this series will be the one that encourages you to go over to your iPod and give us a few stars as well. For nothing less than 5 stars is acceptable at the moment. But in the meantime, we have got no more Punches from the Past, but tune in on Sunday evenings for the Nut House, and we'll catch up with you soon, guys. Thanks very much for listening. Cheers.